What do you do when your parents decide that nothing you own actually belongs to you? I never mattered. Not really. At first, I thought maybe it was just in my head. Maybe I was being dramatic. But the truth was obvious in every little moment of my life. When Tyler broke things, accidents happen. When I did, I was irresponsible. Tyler got celebrated for the bare minimum, while I had to work 10 times harder just to get a nod of acknowledgement. But I could live with that. I had learned to expect nothing. Then they took my car, the only thing that was ever truly mine. Not just any car. A 1963 Chevrolet Corvette Stingray, left to me by my grandfather, the only man who ever really saw me. I spent years restoring it, pouring my blood, sweat, and every hard-earned dollar into bringing it back to life. It wasn't just a car, it was my legacy, my proof that I existed. And then, one day, it was gone. My parents stole it. That's when I realized this was never just about a car. I posted this on r/true off my chest because I need to let this out. And no, this isn't just about a car. It's about something much bigger. I think I always knew I wasn't really part of the family. Not in the way that mattered. Growing up, I was never the priority. That role belonged to my younger brother, Tyler. If he wanted something, he got it. If he made a mistake, it was excused. If I wanted something, it was unnecessary. If I made a mistake, I was a disappointment. At 6 years old, I remember sitting in the living room, staring at the Christmas tree while Tyler tore through a mountain of gifts. He had new video games, action figures, a brand new bike. My pile was 3 packages. One was socks. The second was a pack of pencils for school. The third, a self-help book about responsibility, like a 6-year-old needed that. Practical gifts, my mom said with a smile, like she expected me to be grateful. At 9, I spent weeks saving up my allowance for a model car kit. It was this red Camaro, something I had seen in a store window and wanted more than anything. I counted every dollar, every coin, waiting for the day I had enough. And then, the day before I planned to buy it, my parents took my savings. It's for Tyler's baseball uniform, Dad told me. You don't even play sports. I didn't argue. I had learned by then that it wouldn't change anything. By the time I was a teenager, the pattern was set. Tyler was the golden boy, the one with the bright future, the one who could do no wrong. I was the afterthought, the one who got leftovers, the one who was supposed to understand. But there was one person who never treated me like I was invisible. Walt Sullivan, my grandfather. Grandpa Walt was the only man in my life who ever really saw me. He was a former Marine, tough as nails, but with the kind of steady patience that made you want to listen when he spoke. He ran a small auto repair shop, a place that smelled like oil and old leather, where the radio was always playing some classic rock station. I used to love visiting him, because in his garage, I wasn't the forgotten son. I wasn't the backup child. I was just Caleb. When I was 10, I watched him work on a '76 Chevy pickup. He let me hand him tools, explaining what each one did, letting me get my hands dirty. It was the first time someone actually took the time to teach me something. This isn't just about fixing cars, kid, he told me. This is about patience. Attention to detail. You take care of a machine, it'll take care of you. By 12, I was learning how to change oil, check tire pressure, replace brake pads. While my parents were at Tyler's games, cheering him on like he was going to be the next MLB superstar, I was in the garage, covered in grease, actually learning how to do something useful. At 14, I rebuilt my first carburetor. Grandpa watched me the whole time, nodding in approval. That was the first time I remember feeling like I was actually good at something. Tyler never set foot in that garage. He wasn't interested in anything that required effort. My parents never cared about what I was learning, either. To them, it was just some hobby, something that didn't matter. But to me, it was everything. It was proof that I could build something, that I could take something broken and make it whole again. And then, one day, Grandpa Walt showed me the car, a 1963 Chevrolet Corvette Stingray. It was sitting in the back of his shop, covered in dust, the paint chipped and faded. It was a wreck. But to me, it was beautiful. Been saving this for you, he said. Figured when you're old enough, you might want a project of your own. I couldn't believe it. He was giving me a car. Not just any car, a classic, a piece of history. It wasn't running, not even close. The engine needed a full rebuild, the interior was shot, the suspension was practically non-existent. But I didn't care. This is yours, he told me, if you're willing to put in the work. And God, did I put in the work. Every weekend, every free afternoon, I was in that garage with Grandpa, learning everything. I learned how to strip down an engine, how to sand down a frame, how to weld, how to rewire an electrical system. It took years, years of busted knuckles, of frustration, of saving every dollar I made from part-time jobs to buy parts. And my parents? They didn't care. At 17, I was sanding down the Corvette's body when my mom walked in and wrinkled her nose. "You should be studying instead of wasting time on that thing." Dad barely even looked at it. It wasn't Tyler's, so it wasn't important. But Grandpa saw me. He saw how much I loved that car, how much I loved the work. And then, a few months before I turned 18, he handed me the title. Official. Signed over. My name on it. "Happy early birthday, kiddo," he said. "She's yours now. Always." I didn't cry. I wanted to. I hugged him instead, gripping the papers so tight my knuckles went white. That car was mine. It wasn't just a car. It was my connection to the one person who actually believed in me. It was everything I had worked for. And for the first time in my life, I thought, maybe I had something my parents couldn't take away. I should have known better. I still remember the first time I stepped into my grandfather's garage after he handed me the keys. The 1963 Chevrolet Corvette Stingray sat there like a forgotten relic, its once glorious body now covered in dust, rust creeping along the fenders, the once powerful engine reduced to nothing but a lifeless block of metal. But to me, it wasn't just an old car. It was the only thing in my life that ever truly belonged to me. I ran my hand over the hood, feeling the rough texture of the chipped paint, the dents that told stories of a past life. To most people, it probably looked like scrap metal. But in my eyes, it was a masterpiece waiting to be reborn. My grandfather, Walt Sullivan, had given me more than just a car. He had given me a purpose. Of course, my parents didn't see it that way. My mom, Susan, took one glance at the car and scoffed, saying I was wasting my time. My dad, James, barely looked up from his newspaper before muttering something about not throwing money into a money pit. And Tyler, my golden child of a brother? He outright laughed, telling me I was delusional if I thought I could fix it. "You might as well sell it for parts," he had sneered. "No way you're getting that thing to run." I didn't respond. I had long since learned that arguing with my family was pointless. Instead, I just turned my attention to the Corvette and got to work. The long road to restoration. I knew from the beginning that this was going to be a long and expensive journey. I didn't have the luxury of my parents' financial support like Tyler did. Every dollar I put into this car had to come from my own pocket. So I worked. I picked up shifts at a gas station, scrubbing windshield after windshield, filling up tanks, and dealing with impatient customers who barely spared me a glance. I worked at a local diner, washing dishes until my fingers were raw from the hot water. And every spare dollar I earned went straight into the restoration fund. At night, after long shifts, I'd come home, exhausted but determined, and spend hours in the garage. I started small, learning how to strip down the interior, carefully labeling each part so I wouldn't lose track. I spent weeks watching YouTube videos, reading old repair manuals, and getting advice from the guys at the local auto shop. And when my grandfather was still healthy enough, he'd sit beside me, guiding me through the process. His hands weren't as steady as they used to be, but his mind was sharp as ever. "Patience, kid," he'd remind me whenever I got frustrated. "The car will teach you. Listen to it." And I did. The first time I pulled out the rusted-out engine block, it felt like I was performing heart surgery. Every bolt fought me, my fingers bled from slipping wrenches, and the weight of the engine nearly crushed me more than once. But I kept going. Nights blurred together. Me, covered in grease and sweat, hands aching from hours of sanding down the corroded body panels, lungs full of paint fumes as I carefully coated the frame in that beautiful deep riverside red. I hunted through junkyards for parts, bartered with other car guys online, and even went to swap meets, searching for the exact components I needed. Everything I learned the hard way, through trial, error, and sheer stubbornness. And after 2 years of work, I finally had my moment. The first roar of the engine. The night I turned the key for the first time, I held my breath. I had double-checked every connection, replaced every worn part, fine-tuned the timing, and prayed to whatever car gods might be listening. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. A deep, throaty growl that shook the garage. For the first time in my life, I felt powerful. This wasn't just a car, it was proof. Proof that I could create something from nothing. Proof that I wasn't just the invisible sun in the background. I had done it. On my own. The shift in attitudes. At first, my parents barely noticed. They didn't care when I was struggling. So why would they care when I succeeded? But Tyler? Tyler noticed. He had spent years laughing at my stupid car project, rolling his eyes whenever I turned down invites to go out because I was saving money for parts. But suddenly, now that the Corvette was fully restored, now that it looked brand new, shining under the garage lights like it had just rolled off the factory floor, his attitude changed. I caught him staring at it constantly, lingering in the garage longer than usual. He started asking weirdly specific questions. What was the top speed? How did it handle corners? How much was it worth? Then came the suggestions. You should let me take it out sometime, he said one day, running his hand over the hood like he owned it. Just for a day, man. Just to see how it drives. I shut that down immediately. He pushed harder. Come on, I have a date this weekend. Imagine how cool I'd look pulling up in this thing. I ignored him. Then my parents started. It's just sitting in the garage most of the time, my mom pointed out. Why not let Tyler use it for a while? Yeah, my dad chimed in. You don't even drive it that much. He could get more use out of it. And suddenly, I understood. They had never cared about my hard work. They had never once supported me, asked about my progress, or even congratulated me when I finally got the engine running. But now that it was finished, now that it was valuable, they wanted it. Tyler wanted it. My parents wanted it for him. They didn't see it as mine. They saw it as something they could take. And I knew, in that moment, that they were going to try. The calm before the storm. From that point on, I could feel something shifting. Tyler kept bringing it up, dropping hints that family should share, and that it wasn't fair that I had something he didn't. My parents kept making passive-aggressive comments about how I was being selfish, and I was right, because what happened next? I never saw it coming. There are moments in life that split time into a before and after. Moments that hit you so hard, they redefined everything you thought you knew about the people around you. For me, that moment happened when I walked into my parents' garage and saw nothing but an empty space where my Corvette used to be. But let me start from the beginning. A visit that should have been just that. My grandfather, Walt, had been sick for a while, but he never wanted to make a big deal out of it. I knew his health was declining, the tremors in his hands were getting worse, and his voice didn't have the same strength it once did. But he still kept that same stubborn spark, the one that had carried him through war, through life, through everything. When I got the call from my aunt saying his condition had taken a turn, I didn't even hesitate. I packed a bag, grabbed my keys, and told my parents I was heading out for a few days to see him. They barely acknowledged me. The drive was long, giving me too much time to think. What if this was it? What if this was the last time I got to see him? The man who had given me the only real love and guidance in my life. What would I do without him? When I arrived, Walt was in his chair, staring out at the lake behind my aunt's house. He looked frail, but when he saw me, he grinned. About time you showed up, he muttered, like I was late for work. I sat next to him, and for hours, we talked about everything except the fact that his time was running out. He wanted to hear about the Corvette, about every little detail I had fixed. You kept her alive, he said. That's more than most people do for anything in life. That stuck with me. And then, as if he knew I needed to hear it, he said something else. People will take from you, Caleb. Sometimes it's small. Sometimes it's everything. But they can't take what you build inside. They can't take what makes you who you are. Remember that. I didn't realize at the time just how much I'd need those words. Coming home to an empty garage, when I finally drove back home, exhausted but relieved that I had gotten to see him, I barely noticed anything was wrong at first. The Corvette was gone. I flung the garage door open. Empty. Panic set in. I ran inside, my heart pounding. My parents were in the kitchen, acting completely normal. Where's my car? The words came out sharp, cutting through the silence. My mom barely looked up from her coffee. Tyler took it. My entire body went cold. He what? My dad sighed, like I was being dramatic. He needed a car for college, Caleb. It made sense for him to take it. It made sense. I felt like I had just been sucker punched. This wasn't some misunderstanding. This wasn't some mistake. They had given my car away. And the worst part? They weren't even sorry. The ultimate betrayal. I turned to my dad, trying to keep my voice steady. That car is mine. I rebuilt it. I own it. He smirked. Actually smirked. Not anymore, he said. We transferred the title to Tyler. He's the legal owner now. I swear my brain took a screenshot of that moment. My breath caught in my throat. I knew what he was saying before I even asked, but I needed to hear it. You forged my signature. My mom waved a dismissive hand, like I was throwing a tantrum. It's just a car, Caleb. And we're your parents. We made the right decision. Something inside me snapped. They had spent my whole life making decisions for me, taking what they wanted, acting like nothing I had ever worked for actually belonged to me. But this was the last straw. The weight of realization. I don't even remember what I said next. I think I just stood there, shaking, while they looked at me like I was the one being unreasonable, like I was the selfish one. I left the house. I don't remember grabbing my keys. I don't remember walking to my truck. I just remember the crushing weight in my chest as I drove away, hands gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I pulled into a gas station parking lot and just sat there, staring at the dashboard, trying to process what had just happened. And then, it hit me all at once. This wasn't just about the car. It was about every Christmas morning where I got socks while Tyler got the latest gaming console. It was about every missed school event. Every time they ignored my achievements while celebrating his bare minimum effort. It was about the way they had spent years showing me, over and over again, that I was nothing more than a backup plan. In their eyes, I had never truly owned anything. Not my time, not my achievements, not even my own damn name on a legal document. I thought about my grandfather. What would he say if he knew? And then, I heard his voice in my head. People will take from you, Caleb, but they can't take what you build inside. I took a deep breath, then another, and I knew what I had to do. They thought they had won. They thought they could take from me and walk away without consequences. But not this time. I sat in my truck outside of Dean's house, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my fingers ached. My mind kept replaying the conversation with my parents over and over again. They had dismissed my anger like it was nothing. It's just a car, Caleb. They had justified their theft with a smug sense of entitlement. We made the right decision. And the worst part? They had acted like I should be grateful. It belongs to Tyler now. The rage burned so hot in my chest that, for a split second, I actually considered driving straight to Tyler's college and taking back what was mine. But I knew that wouldn't work. Storming in with fists clenched wouldn't fix this. If I wanted justice, I had to be smart. I took a deep breath and finally forced myself to move. Before I could even knock, the front door flew open. Dean was already standing there, arms crossed, his expression tight with frustration. He didn't need to ask what was wrong. He already knew. He just pulled me inside without hesitation. I let it all out. Every disgusting detail, every sickening revelation. My voice was steady, but I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me. By the time I was done, Dean was pacing the room, his hands clenched into fists. His disbelief was written all over his face, the sheer audacity of it all sinking in. He wasn't just angry on my behalf. He was furious in a way that only a real friend could be. And then, as he stopped pacing, something in his expression shifted. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty, just conviction. That was the moment I realized I wasn't alone in this. And for the first time that night, I felt something other than rage. I felt determined. If I was going to win this, I needed hard proof. Dean, always the strategist, immediately laid out what I had to gather. First, I needed the original car title, the one Grandpa Walt had signed over to me when I turned 18. It had to be somewhere in my old room, buried under my old documents. That paper alone was the foundation of my case. Next were receipts and records. I had meticulously saved everything from the restoration process. Invoices, parts orders, even conversations with mechanics and sellers. Every cent I had poured into that car was documented. Then, there were photo records. I had taken hundreds of pictures throughout the entire process. The rusted-out frame, the stripped-down engine, the bodywork. The first time I turned the ignition and heard it roar to life. If anyone doubted the amount of work I had put in, those pictures would be undeniable proof. I had one night to get everything together. The real challenge was getting the original title without my parents knowing. I could have confronted them, demanded my documents back. But I knew exactly how that would go. They would stall, gaslight, pretend they had misplaced it, maybe even destroy it outright. So I didn't ask. That night, after my parents had gone to sleep, I drove back to the house. Dean came with me, acting as lookout. I had lived there my entire life. I knew which floorboards creaked, which doors needed an extra push to open quietly. Slipping inside was easy, but my pulse was pounding the entire time. My room was exactly how I had left it. Untouched. Forgotten. Like it belonged to a dead relative instead of a son. After 10 minutes of digging, I found it. The original title, signed by Grandpa Walt himself, proving that the Corvette was mine. Shoving it into my jacket, I slipped back out the same way I came. The night air was crisp, but I felt a fire in my chest. Dean and I drove off in silence, the weight of the moment settling between us. Finally, as we hit the highway, he exhaled sharply. Step 1 done. Now, It was time to bury them. By the next morning, I had everything I needed. Sitting at Dean's kitchen table, I spread out the evidence like a detective solving a crime. The original title, my legal proof of ownership, receipts and invoices, the financial trail proving that I was the one who had restored the car. Hundreds of photos, a visual timeline from rusted scrap metal to a fully restored classic. The bank footage, the undeniable proof that I was 300 miles away at the exact moment my so-called signature appeared on the forged transfer documents. Dean looked at everything, then let out a low whistle. He knew, just as well as I did, that my parents and Tyler were screwed. But I wasn't done. Not yet. I grabbed my phone and made one last call. David Parker, Dean's father, had known me since I was a kid. Unlike my own parents, he had always treated me like a person. When he picked up, his voice was calm and measured. He had always been a composed man, but I could hear the concern in his tone as I explained the situation. The stolen car, the forged signature, the blatant fraud. He didn't interrupt once. He just listened. And when I finally finished, he let out a long breath. He told me that this was serious. Forgery, fraud, grand theft auto. These weren't just family disputes. These were felonies. And then he asked the question I had been waiting for. Are you ready to press charges? I thought about it. Thought about my parents. Thought about Tyler. I was done being the forgotten son. Done being stepped on. Done letting them take things from me without consequences. For the first time in my life, I was going to fight back. I told David Parker, yes, I'm ready. There was a pause. And then, his answer came without hesitation. Good. Let's make them pay. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to sue my own family. But then again, I never thought my own family would forge my signature, steal my car, and act like I should just get over it. Filing the lawsuit wasn't a decision I made lightly. Even after gathering every shred of evidence, even after Dean's dad assured me that the case was rock solid, there was still a tiny voice in the back of my mind whispering, they're still your parents. But that voice didn't stand a chance against the rage, betrayal, and exhaustion that had been building for years. So I signed the papers. And just like that, I declared war. Dean's dad, David Parker, wasted no time. Within 48 hours, formal complaints were filed for grand theft auto, forgery, fraud, and unlawful transfer of property. He made sure every legal loophole was closed, every possible escape route cut off. My parents had committed multiple felonies, and now they were going to face the consequences. I still remember the moment the police showed up at Tyler's dorm. I wasn't there to see it, but the report painted a beautiful picture. Tyler had been bragging about his new ride for weeks. He'd parked the Corvette in the faculty lot because apparently, in his delusional mind, he deserved VIP treatment for existing. When the officers arrived, he actually argued with them, insisting that the car was his. That's when they dropped the bombshell. The vehicle had been reported as stolen, and the transfer documents were illegal. The moment he realized they weren't bluffing, he caved. He admitted that our parents had handled everything, that they had assured him it was fine, that I'd get over it. Spoiler alert, I did not get over it. With the car recovered, the next step was the arrest warrants. Yep, arrest warrants. Tyler was arrested first for knowingly driving a stolen vehicle and conspiracy to commit fraud. He didn't spend long in jail, but even one night behind bars was enough to shatter his golden boy ego. My parents were next. They were charged with forgery, fraud, and tampering with legal documents. When the police showed up at their house, my mom collapsed into hysterics. My dad, he tried to talk his way out of it, going on about how this was just a family misunderstanding and how I was overreacting over a damn car. The officers didn't care. They put him in cuffs and took him away. For 3 weeks, my phone was a war zone. The first wave of messages was rage. Furious voicemails from my mom calling me ungrateful, my dad ranting about how I was destroying our family, Tyler screaming at me through text that I was ruining his life. Then came the guilt trips. Dad tried the logical route. This is going to cost us everything. Do you really want that on your conscience? And then the final stage, begging. My parents offered me money. They were willing to take out a second mortgage to compensate me, as if they could slap a price tag on their betrayal and wipe it all away. But I didn't answer a single call. For the first time in my life, I was choosing myself. The legal process dragged on, but in the end, the evidence was overwhelming. Tyler pleaded guilty to reduced charges, got 6 months probation and 100 hours of community service. But the real kicker? He was expelled from college. Turns out universities don't take kindly to students getting arrested for felony auto theft. My parents weren't so lucky. Since both had knowingly participated in the forgery and fraud, the judge wasn't lenient. They each got 18 months probation, massive fines, and community service. But the real punishment? Their reputation was ruined. For years, they had built this illusion: the perfect family, the devoted parents, the successful son. Now, their neighbors knew. Their coworkers whispered, and I got my damn car back. A year ago, I would have felt guilty about all of this. I would have second-guessed myself, wondered if I had gone too far. But now, I know I did the right thing. Because for the first time in my life, I stood up for myself. And I won. I never imagined I'd see my own family in court. But there they were. Tyler, slumped in his seat at the defendant's table, eyes darting around the room like a cornered animal. My father, his usual arrogant posture now replaced with a stiff, forced composure. My mother, gripping a tissue in her lap, looking anywhere but at me. And me? I sat beside David Parker, my lawyer, the man who'd become more of a father figure to me in the past few months than my actual father had in my entire life. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't second-guessing myself. I was just waiting for justice to be served. David was relentless. He laid everything out with surgical precision, presenting every piece of evidence that proved beyond a doubt that my parents had forged my signature and illegally transferred my car to Tyler. He showed the original title, signed by my grandfather. He presented receipts, emails, and text messages confirming that the car had been mine from the moment Walt gave it to me. And then came the nail in the coffin: the ATM footage of me in Michigan at the exact moment my so-called signature appeared on the fraudulent transfer documents. David's voice was calm, methodical, and deadly as he explained to the judge that there was no possible way I could have signed those papers. My mother let out a quiet sob. My father shifted in his chair, jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might shatter. Tyler just stared at the table, like a child caught stealing from the cookie jar. But this wasn't a cookie. This was grand theft, fraud, and forgery. When it was their turn to speak, my father tried to do what he always did: control the narrative. The judge shut him down immediately. "This is not a family dispute, Mr. Sullivan," she said, her voice sharp. "This is a criminal case involving multiple felonies." For the first time in his life, my father had nothing to say. Then it was my mother's turn. David didn't even have to cross-examine her. Her own words condemned her, because at no point did she deny forging my signature. She just kept making excuses. And Tyler, he had nothing. When asked why he accepted a car that he knew wasn't his, he just shrugged and muttered something about how he thought our parents had handled everything legally. He sounded pathetic. He sounded exactly like the spoiled, entitled brat he had always been. And the judge saw right through it. When the judge finally spoke, the entire courtroom went silent. After reviewing the evidence, it is clear that a deliberate and fraudulent transfer of property occurred. Caleb Sullivan was the rightful owner of the vehicle in question. The defendants, James Sullivan, Susan Sullivan, and Tyler Sullivan, engaged in actions that constitute fraud, forgery, and grand theft auto. I didn't even realize I was holding my breath until I felt Dean's hand grip my shoulder. The court hereby orders the immediate return of the Chevrolet Corvette Stingray 1963 to Caleb Sullivan. Tyler Sullivan is sentenced to 8 months of suspended jail time, 3 years of probation, and 200 hours of community service. James and Susan Sullivan are ordered to pay a significant financial penalty for their involvement in the fraud. It was over. My parents lost. Tyler lost. And I won. Tyler looked stunned, like the idea of facing consequences had never even crossed his mind. My father, his face was blank, his entire illusion of control shattered. And my mother, she finally turned to look at me. Her lips moved like she was going to say something. Maybe an apology. Maybe another excuse. I didn't care. I stood up, walked past them, and left the courtroom without looking back. It was mine again. But more importantly, for the first time in my life, I was free. 1 year later, a full year since I walked out of that courtroom and left my so-called family behind. And I don't regret a damn thing. After everything, I packed up what little I had, threw my duffel bag in the passenger seat of my Corvette, and drove out of that town. No goodbyes. No second chances. No looking back. I started fresh somewhere far away, in a place where no one knew the Sullivans, where I was just Caleb, not the forgotten son, or the one who doesn't matter. And as for them, my parents lost everything: their reputation, their finances, their illusion of control. Turns out, stealing from your own son doesn't make for a great look in the eyes of extended family or the community. Relatives who once praised them suddenly wanted nothing to do with them. They were toxic, exposed, disgraced. Tyler, he went from being the golden child to the family screw-up overnight. A felony on his record, forced to do community service, no longer the perfect son they had always painted him to be. For the first time in his life, he was forced to deal with real consequences. And me? I rebuilt my life on my own terms. I still have my Corvette. I still have my freedom. And I don't know what my parents or Tyler are doing now. And honestly, I don't care anymore. This story was originally shared on our /True Off My Chest, where thousands of people reacted to Caleb's journey. It's not just about a stolen car. It's about self-worth, setting boundaries, and realizing that family isn't always who you're born to. So what would you do if your own family betrayed you like this? Let us know in the comments. And if you want to hear more shocking real-life stories, don't forget to follow Reddit True Vault.